Hello and welcome to this episode of Drinking with Dave. So on this episode I am drinking Tetley's Smooth Flow Draught Bitter. I'll just read you the can here. For best results, serve cold, pull the tab, listen to the surge and pour down the side of the glass in one smooth movement. Which means there's a nitrogen widget in this can. Now, I haven't opened one of these cans up, but when you get the Guinness ones, there's a floating widget in it. This one seems to be stuck to the bottom. Alcohol by volume 3.6%, 1.6 UK units. Enjoy responsibly, all that other stuff. Bitter brewed in the UK for Joshua Tetley and Son Limited, Northampton. Contains barley, this sort of stuff. Now, a friend of mine gave me this beer because he doesn't drink beer, and he came into about 12 or 16 cans of Tetley's from a relative of his. And he didn't drink beer, so he passed it on to me. So thanks very much, Kev, for supporting the show. Anyway, let's move into the review here. First off, because it's a nitrogenated beer, it has this lovely, creamy, pillowy head on the top. Very, very fine bubbles that form this big, soft head, which looks very, very nice. The beer itself looks incredible. It's a orangey red color when held up to light, very light orange. In all other instances, it's very nicely orangey brown. It's much lighter than a Smithwick's. So it's a nitrogenated bitter, which means it's a lot like the John Smith's Extra Smooth that we had a couple of weeks ago. So I'll move on to the smell test here. Instantly it smells like a bitter beer. It smells like those not stylized bitter beers, but the ones that are in the style of bitter, and it kind of has that piney smell to it. If you remember when we did the homebrewed bitter, I think it was last season, that definitely smelled a lot like pine. This has a similar smell to it. It actually smells a little bit like McCardle's, which I had earlier this season, or the Southwold bitter, which I haven't tasted on the show, but I'm a big fan of. It smells nicely sweet and malty, but it has that kind of piney back end on it with the hops. Anyway, move on to the taste. Well, right off the bat, it's not lying about being incredibly smooth. Because it's nitrogenated, the bubbles are incredibly fine, which means it doesn't have any aggressive carbonation to it. It's nice and smooth on the mouthfeel. In fact, it tastes mostly flat, but that's not to its detriment. You have an initial piney bitterness, which is very pleasant because it's not overbearing. It's quite well balanced in terms of the pint, and then you get a sort of slow burning, mellowy sweetness. There's possibly a little smokiness to it, but only a very small hint. It's nice and malty, this beer. For being as, I mean, it is essentially a brown beer, but it's very light. But there's a nice maltiness that comes through in this. It's not, the hops don't overpower the sweetness. It's very well balanced, this beer. I like this quite a lot. The 3.6% alcohol is just a little lower than what you would usually expect. But brown beers tend to be, and the campaign for real ale people and those guys, their beers tend to be a little on the lower side, anywhere between 3.4 and 4%. So it's a little lower on the alcohol, but I think that serves it quite well. Because of the nitrogenation in this beer, as it were, the nitrogen, you can see how well it clings to the side of the glass there, because of the very fine bubbles. But because it's not aggressively carbonated, it's actually much more refreshing than a lot of beers that claim to be refreshing, because those are aggressively carbonated lagers, and they tend to be very fizzy, basically. Whereas this is actually smooth and refreshing. The bitter builds up over time. It builds up this layer of hoppiness in the back of the mouth that can be quite bitter. And that's not entirely without its merits. I mean, it's an interesting taste, but I think the more you drink of this, the more bitter your mouth will become, essentially. Yeah, as you proceed down through the pint, it becomes less sweet, less malty, and more hoppy and bitter towards the end. Personally, I think that bitters are more well served with standard regular carbonation as opposed to putting the nitrogen in them. I mean, it does give a much smoother beer and it is easier to drink, but I just think that the regular carbonation in combination with the hops and the style of the beer, I think it just works better, especially out of a bottle. I mean, the Southwall bitter out of the bottle is very nice. And while this is good, this is a very good beer, um, I just don't know how sold I am on the nitrogen aspect. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and I will see you on the next episode of Drinking with Dave.